The sound of laser fire echoed across the barren planet as smoke filled the red sky. Explosions shook the ground every few seconds. The war between the Galactic Coalition and the deadly hive was going badly. Very badly. Kethavar lay on his side in the dirt, his breathing slow and painful. Dark green blood seeped from wounds on his arms and chest. But the worst part was not the pain from his injuries. The worst part was the black marks covering his once beautiful silver scales. The bioweapon had hit him 3 hours ago during the retreat. The hive used these terrible weapons to mark their enemies. The black substance burned through armor and skin, leaving permanent stains that would never fade. For a Saurian warrior like Kethavar, these marks meant something worse than death. They meant he was cursed. Kethavar watched as coalition ships landed nearby to collect the wounded. His heart filled with hope when he saw the familiar shapes of Saurian transport vessels. His people had come for him. After 15 years of faithful service, after dozens of battles, after all the times he had risked his life for his brothers, they would not leave him behind. He tried to call out, but his voice came out as a weak croak. The black marks had damaged his throat too. Still, he could see other Saurian soldiers moving around the landing zone. Some were wounded. Some were helping others. Soon they would find him. A group of 4 Saurian warriors walked past him, carrying a wounded comrade on a stretcher. Kethavar knew 2 of them. Veltar and Jeklon had fought beside him just this morning. They had shared jokes over their morning meal. They had planned to visit the new crystal gardens on Soros Prime when their tour ended. "Help," Kethavar whispered as they passed. "Please." Veltar looked down at him. For a moment their eyes met. Kethavar saw recognition flash across his friend's face, but then Veltar saw the black marks. His expression changed to horror and disgust. Without saying a word, Veltar looked away and kept walking. "Veltar," Kethavar called out louder this time. "It is me, Kethavar." The 4 warriors stopped. They turned to look at him again. All of them stared at the black marks covering his body. Jeklon actually took a step backward. "He is marked by the enemy," Jeklon said quietly. "The bio-curse has claimed him." "We must not look upon him," Veltar replied. "It is forbidden. The priests say the curse can spread through sight." "But it is Kethavar," said the youngest warrior, Nexpill. "He saved us from the hive ambush yesterday. If not for him, we would all be dead." "That was yesterday," Veltar said firmly. "Today he is cursed." "Today he is not our brother. The old laws are clear. We cannot help one who bears the mark of corruption." Kethavar felt his heart break as he watched his closest friends turn their backs on him. The warriors picked up their stretcher and continued toward the ships. They did not look back. More Saurian soldiers passed by in the next hour. Some Kethavar knew personally. Others were strangers from different units. All of them saw him. All of them saw the black marks. And all of them walked away. One young medic actually started toward him before an older sergeant grabbed his arm. "Do not touch the cursed one," the sergeant warned. "You will be marked too, and then your family will cast you out." Is helping one doomed warrior worth losing everything? The young medic looked at Kethavar with sad eyes, but he obeyed. He followed the sergeant toward the ships. As the hours passed, Kethavar began to understand the truth. No one was coming for him. His own people, the proud Saurian republic that he had served with honor, were leaving him to die alone on this horrible planet. All because of some old superstition about enemy bioweapons. The irony was bitter. Kethavar had gotten these marks while saving others. A squad of young Saurian recruits had been trapped by hive bio-warriors. The enemy had surrounded them completely. Kethavar could have stayed safe with the main force, but he chose to help. He charged into the enemy alone, drawing their fire and creating an opening for the recruits to escape. The bioweapon had hit him during that charge. The black substance burned through his armor and into his scales, but his sacrifice had worked. All 6 recruits made it back to safety. They were probably on the evacuation ships right now, safe and healthy while their savior lay dying in the dirt. Kethavar closed his eyes and tried to remember better times. He thought about his home city of Velsharos, with its crystal spires reaching toward the sky. He thought about his family's estate, where purple flowers bloomed in the eternal spring. He thought about his younger sister, Lysandra, who always laughed at his terrible jokes. Would she even mourn him, or would the priest tell her that her brother had been corrupted by evil, that she should forget he ever existed? A new sound reached his ears. Voices calling out in a language he recognized but rarely heard on the battlefield. Human voices. "Survivor here!" Someone shouted an accented coalition standard. I need a stretcher. Check that crater over there, another voice replied. The thermal scanner shows life signs humans, the strange mammals from the small blue planet called Earth. Kethvar had worked with human soldiers before, but not often. Most species preferred to fight alongside their own kind. Humans were different, though. They seemed to work with anyone who needed help. Footsteps approached. Kethvar opened his eyes and saw a small figure in medical gear walking toward him. The figure removed their helmet, revealing a human face, a female with short black hair and dark eyes behind protective glasses. The human medic knelt beside him and immediately began checking his wounds. She did not flinch at the sight of his black-marked scales. She did not step back in fear or disgust. She simply started treating his injuries with quick, efficient movements. "Easy there, big guy," she said in a gentle voice. "I'm Dr. Chen. You're going to be okay." Kethvar stared at her in amazement. This human, this stranger from a species he barely knew, was doing what his own people would not do. She was helping him despite the marks that made him cursed in the eyes of his brothers. "Why?" he whispered. Dr. Chen looked up from her work. "Why what? Why help me? I am marked. I am cursed. My own people will not touch me." The human's face hardened with anger, but not at him. She glared toward the Saurian ships in the distance. "Your people are idiots," she said bluntly. "These are just chemical burns from a bioweapon. There's no curse, no magic, no spiritual corruption. It's just enemy technology designed to hurt you. And my job is to heal people who are hurt." She continued working on his wounds, cleaning them and applying some kind of medical gel that eased the pain. "Besides," Dr. Chen added, "where I come from, scars just mean you survived something tough. They're proof that you're a fighter." Kethvar felt something strange in his chest. Hope. For the first time since being marked, he felt like maybe he was not completely lost. Maybe there was still a place for him somewhere in the galaxy. "Will I live?" he asked. Dr. Chen smiled. "Oh, you'll live. These wounds look worse than they are. The bioweapon was designed to mark you, not kill you. Typical hive psychological warfare. They want your own side to abandon you." She finished her immediate treatment and called for a stretcher. 2 human soldiers jogged over, carrying the medical transport between them. "This one goes to the medical frigate," Dr. Chen told them. "Priority status." As they lifted Kethvar onto the stretcher, he heard angry voices nearby. 3 Saurian officers were approaching, their scales bright silver in the dim light. "Human," one of them called out. "You cannot take that soldier. He is marked. He is no longer part of our forces." Dr. Chen stood up and faced the Saurian officers. She was much smaller than they were, but she did not seem afraid. "He's a wounded coalition soldier," she said firmly. "That makes him my responsibility." "You do not understand our ways," the lead officer replied. "The curse. I understand that you're abandoning a warrior who risked his life for others," Dr. Chen interrupted. "I understand that you're letting superstition override basic decency, and I understand that if you try to stop me from treating this patient, I'll file a formal complaint with Coalition Command." The Saurian officers looked shocked. Clearly, they were not used to being challenged by a human. "You take a great risk," one of them warned. "The corruption may spread to you." Dr. Chen laughed, but it was not a kind sound. "The only corruption I see here is the kind that makes people abandon their friends." She turned back to the stretcher team. "Let's go. Our patient needs proper medical care." As they carried him toward the human medical ship, Kethvar looked back at his own people one last time. They stood there watching, their faces showing a mixture of anger and confusion. They could not understand why a human would risk herself for a cursed warrior. But Kethvar was beginning to understand something new. Maybe being abandoned by his own kind was not the end of his story. Maybe it was just the beginning of a different one. The human ships were smaller than Saurian vessels, but they seemed more welcoming somehow. As they carried him inside, Kethvar heard Dr. Chen speaking to someone on her communication device. "Medical Bay, this is Dr. Chen. I'm bringing in a Saurian warrior with bioweapon exposure. Prepare a private room and full treatment protocol." "Doctor," a voice replied through the device. "The Saurian medical staff is refusing to treat marked patients." "Should we? Then we'll treat him ourselves," Dr. Chen said firmly. "Prep Surgical Bay 2. I'll handle this personally." Kethvar closed his eyes as they moved him through. The medical bay of the coalition frigate Harmony hummed with quiet activity. Dr. Sarah Chen worked steadily at her examination table, her hands moving with practiced skill over Kethvar's wounded form. The large Saurian warrior lay still, watching her every movement with dark, intelligent eyes. "The good news is that the bioweapon didn't penetrate too deeply," Sarah said as she cleaned another section of blackened scales. "The bad news is that these marks are permanent. The chemical bonds with your natural scale proteins at a molecular level." Kethvar nodded slowly. He had already accepted this truth. "My people believe the marks carry a spiritual curse, that the enemy's evil can spread from person to person through contact." Sarah paused in her work and looked at him directly. "Do you believe that?" "I did," Kethvar replied honestly. "For my entire life I was taught that the biomarks were signs of corruption, that those who bear them become servants of the hive, willing or not. But if that were true, would I not have attacked you by now?" Sarah smiled grimly. "Good point. The hive is smart, I'll give them that. They know how to use fear and superstition as weapons, make people afraid of their own wounded, and you destroy unit cohesion without firing a shot." She returned to her work, applying a medical gel that would help his scales heal properly around the black marks. The treatment stung at first, but then brought blessed relief from the constant burning sensation. "Dr. Chen," Kethvar said quietly, "why are you doing this? Not just the medical treatment, but talking to me like I am still a person. Your own medical staff seems uncomfortable with my presence." Sarah paused and sat back in her chair. Through the medical bay's small window, they could see the stars streaming past as the frigate traveled through hyperspace. "You want the honest answer?" she asked. Kethvar nodded. "Because I've seen what happens when fear drives medical decisions," Sarah said. "During my training on Earth, I worked in regions where certain diseases carried social stigma. Patients with those conditions were often abandoned by their families, shunned by their communities. They died not from their illness, but from isolation and neglect." She picked up a fresh medical instrument and continued her work. "I swore an oath when I became a doctor. First, do no harm. That includes not harming people by abandoning them when they need help most." "But surely there are limits," Kethvar said. "What if helping me truly did put others at risk?" Sarah considered this as she worked. "If there was real scientific evidence of danger, then yes, I would take precautions. Isolation, protective gear, quarantine procedures, but I wouldn't abandon a patient. I'd find a way to help safely." She gestured toward his blackened scales. "These marks? I've run every scan we have. They're chemically inert now that they've bonded with your scales. No radiation, no toxic compounds, no infectious agents. The only thing dangerous about them is the fear they cause in others." The medical bay door hissed open, and Dr. Vexlan, a tall Saurian medic, entered carrying a supply tray. He moved carefully, keeping as much distance as possible from Kethvar while still being able to do his job. "Dr. Chen," Vexlan said formally, "I have brought the supplies you requested. However, I must again advise against continued close contact with the marked one." "The risk is non-existent," Sarah interrupted firmly. "We've been over this, Vexlan. Your own medical scanners confirm there's no biological hazard." "The scanners cannot detect spiritual corruption," Vexlan replied stiffly. "Some dangers exist beyond the realm of science." Sarah stood up and faced the Saurian medic directly. Despite being much smaller, her presence seemed to fill the room. "Dr. Vexlan, you are a trained medical professional. You have advanced degrees in biology, chemistry, and xenophysiology. Are you seriously telling me that you believe in magic curses?" Vexlan's scales flushed slightly, a sign of embarrassment among his people. "It is not magic. It is tradition. Ancient wisdom passed down through generations." "Ancient ignorance," Sarah corrected bluntly. "And it's causing you to violate your own medical ethics." "I am not violating anything," Vexlan protested. "The marked one is no longer considered a valid patient under Saurian medical law." "Well, he's a valid patient under coalition medical law," Sarah shot back. "And since this is a coalition vessel, my authority supersedes your cultural prejudices." Kethvar watched this exchange with fascination. He had never seen anyone stand up to Saurian tradition so directly. In his culture, ancient customs were treated with almost religious reverence. To challenge them was unthinkable. But here was this small human female, barely half his size, fearlessly confronting beliefs that had shaped his entire civilization. She was not being disrespectful exactly, but she was absolutely refusing to accept something she viewed as wrong. "Dr. Chen is correct," Kethvar said quietly. Both medics turned to look at him. I have been marked for nearly a day now. If the corruption were real, would it not have manifested by now? Would I not have turned violent or tried to communicate with the hive? Or shown some sign of enemy influence? Vexlan looked uncomfortable. The corruption may be subtle. It may take time to what? Kethavar interrupted. To make me evil? To turn me into a monster? Vexlan, you have known me for 3 years. We served together on the Calathon campaign. Have I seemed like someone who could be easily corrupted by the enemy? That was before, Vexlan replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Before what? Before I risked my life to save 6 young recruits? Before I charged an enemy position alone to create an escape route for others? If those actions show corruption, then perhaps corruption is not the evil we thought it was. Sarah looked between the two Saurians with interest. She could see the doubt in Vexlan's eyes, the way ancient certainty was being challenged by present reality. Look, she said in a gentler tone. I understand that traditions are important. They provide stability and meaning. But good traditions help people. Bad traditions hurt people, and any tradition that says you should abandon wounded soldiers is a bad tradition. Vexlan stood quietly for a long moment, clearly struggling with conflicting beliefs. Finally, he set down his supply tray and moved closer to Kethavar's examination table. The bioweapon marks, he said carefully. What do they feel like? Kethavar blinked in surprise. It was the first time since being marked that another Saurian had asked him a direct question. They burn sometimes, he answered honestly, especially when touched or exposed to heat. But mostly they just feel heavy, like carrying extra weight. Vexlan nodded slowly. And your thoughts? Do you feel any influence? Any whispers or urges that seem foreign? None, Kethavar replied firmly. I'm still myself, still loyal to the Coalition, still disgusted by the Hive and everything they represent, still brave enough to risk his life for others, Sarah added pointedly. Vexlan was quiet for another moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he pulled up a chair and sat down next to the examination table. I will assist with your treatment, he said formally, if you will permit it. Kethavar felt his throat tighten with emotion. You would risk the judgment of our people? Our people, Vexlan said slowly, are not here. And Dr. Chen is right about medical ethics. If I am to be a healer, I must heal, regardless of fear. Sarah smiled and handed Vexlan a medical scanner. Start with a full bioscan. I want to document everything about these marks. The more we understand them, the better we can help future victims. As the two medics worked together over his wounds, Kethavar felt something he had not experienced since being marked: hope for acceptance. Perhaps not from his people as a whole, but from individuals who chose to see past fear and superstition. Dr. Chen, he said quietly, what will happen to me when we reach the medical station? Will I be treated as a patient or as an outcast? Sarah exchanged glances with Vexlan before answering. Honestly, it will probably be difficult. Many species share similar superstitions about bioweapon marks. You may face prejudice from staff and other patients. But, Vexlan added unexpectedly, you will not face it alone. I will document your case thoroughly. I will recommend continued treatment. And I will argue against any attempt to isolate you based on unfounded fears. Kethavar stared at his fellow Saurian in amazement. A few hours ago, Vexlan would not even look at him. Now he was promising to stand by his side against their entire culture. You risk much, Kethavar warned. We all risk much, Vexlan replied. The question is whether we risk it for good reasons or bad ones. Dr. Chen has shown me that fear is a bad reason to abandon someone who needs help. Sarah continued her work, but Kethavar could see the satisfaction in her eyes. She had not just treated his physical wounds. She had helped heal the prejudice that would have left him completely alone. There is something else you should know, Sarah said as she finished applying the last of the healing gel. I've put in a request to have you assigned to our medical unit. Kethavar looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean, Sarah said with a slight smile, that if your own military won't accept you back, maybe ours will. The Coalition Medical Corps can always use good people, especially those with combat experience. You could serve as a medical security specialist, helping protect medical teams in dangerous areas. You would want me? Kethavar asked, hardly daring to believe it. Want you? Sarah laughed. Kethavar, you charged an enemy position alone to save 6 soldiers. You're exactly the kind of person I want watching my back in dangerous situations. Vexlan nodded in Ager 3. Weeks had passed since Kethvar arrived at Medical Station Gamma 7. The massive orbital facility served as the Coalition's primary treatment center for the Outer Rim conflicts. Thousands of wounded soldiers from dozens of species received care here every day, but none of them wanted to be near Kethvar. He sat alone in the station's recreation area, reading a human book that Dr. Chen had given him. The things they carried was about human soldiers in an ancient Earth war. The stories were sad but beautiful, filled with brotherhood and loss and the weight of memory. Around him, the recreation area buzzed with activity. Injured soldiers played games, watched entertainment vids, or simply talked with friends and family via hologram. But there was always an empty circle around Kethvar's chair, a space that no one would cross. The other patients were not cruel about it. They did not insult him or demand that he leave. They simply acted as if he did not exist. When he entered a room, conversations would pause until he found a seat, then resume once it was clear he would stay in his corner. When he approached the food dispensers, others would step aside and wait for him to finish before approaching. Even the medical staff, despite their professional training, seemed uncomfortable around him. Nurses would deliver his medication quickly and leave without the small talk they shared with other patients. Therapists would conduct his physical rehabilitation sessions with efficient politeness but no warmth. The only exception was Dr. Sarah Chen. Every morning at 0800 hours, she would arrive at his bedside with coffee for herself and tea for him. She would check his wounds, review his progress, and spend at least an hour simply talking about medicine, about their respective worlds, about anything that came to mind. "How are you feeling today?" Sarah asked as she settled into the chair beside his bed. It was their morning routine now in its third week. "Physically much better," Kethvar replied honestly. His wounds had healed well, leaving only the permanent black marks as evidence of his encounter with the Hive bioweapon. "Mentally, that is more complicated." Sarah nodded as she examined his arm where one of the larger marks covered his scales. "Want to talk about it?" Kethvar set down his book and considered the question. Sarah was the only person who seemed genuinely interested in his thoughts and feelings. Everyone else treated him like a medical case or a dangerous object. "I have been thinking about honor," he said finally. "My entire life I was taught that honor comes from serving your people, from following tradition, from being accepted by your brothers in arms. But what happens when your people reject you? What happens when tradition demands that you be abandoned? Where is honor then?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, sipping her coffee as she thought. "What do you think honor is?" "I used to think it was simple," Kethvar replied. "Follow orders, protect your comrades, serve the greater good. But now, I wonder if true honor comes from inside, from doing what is right even when others tell you it is wrong." "That sounds like wisdom to me," Sarah said gently. "Your people abandoned you because of superstition and fear, but you saved those 6 recruits because it was the right thing to do. Which action shows more honor?" Kethvar had been struggling with this question for weeks. Everything he had been taught said that his people's judgment was absolute, that their ancient traditions held ultimate wisdom. But his experience told a different story. "The recruits I saved," he said slowly. "They were on the evacuation ships, safe and healthy. I saw them before we left the planet. Did they acknowledge you?" Kethvar's laugh was bitter. "They looked through me as if I were not there. One of them, a young female named Silara, I had personally pulled her from a collapsed bunker. She stared directly at me for several seconds, then turned away as if she had seen nothing." Sarah's expression hardened. "That must have hurt." "It did. But it also taught me something important. I did not save them to earn their gratitude. I saved them because they needed saving. Their inability to acknowledge that does not change the rightness of my actions. Now that," Sarah said with a smile, "sounds like real honor to me." They were interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Vexlan, who had requested transfer to the medical station to continue working on Kethvar's case. The Saurian medic carried a data pad and looked excited about something. "Kethvar, Dr. Chen, you need to see this," Vexlan said as he approached. "I have been researching the bioweapon marks, comparing them to historical records." He activated his datapad, projecting a holographic display of ancient Saurian text. "These marks are not new. The Hive has been using similar weapons for over 2,000 years, but I found something interesting in the old records." The hologram shifted to show images of ancient Saurian warriors. some bearing familiar black marks on their scales. These warriors were called the Shenvara Awar, the Shadow Blessed. Vexlan continued. According to the oldest texts, they were revered as heroes. The marks were seen as proof of their courage in facing the enemy. Kethavar stared at the ancient images. What changed? Politics, Vexlan said grimly. About 800 years ago, a group of priests gained power by claiming that the marks carried spiritual contamination. They convinced people that the Shadow Blessed were actually cursed. The hero warriors became outcasts overnight. Sarah leaned forward with interest. So the current superstition is relatively recent? In historical terms, yes. For most of Saurian history, bioweapon marks were badges of honor. Warriors would sometimes display them prominently as proof of their battlefield courage. Kethvar felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. So my ancestors would have celebrated these marks, not feared them. More than that, Vexlan said, consulting his datapad again. The ancient texts described the Shadow Blessed as guardians of the innocent. They often served as protectors for medical personnel, refugees, and non-combatants. They were specifically chosen for these roles because their marks proved they would sacrifice themselves for others. The three sat in contemplative silence as this information sank in. Sarah was the first to speak. It seems like you're continuing an ancient tradition without even knowing it, she said to Kethvar, protecting those who need protection. But why did the priests change the meaning? Kethvar asked. Why turn heroes into outcasts? Vexlan's expression darkened. Fear and control. When people are afraid, they look to authorities for guidance. The priests gained power by becoming the ones who decided who was pure and who was corrupted. It gave them enormous influence over society. And 8 centuries later, that fear is so deeply embedded that even educated medics believe it, Sarah added, looking pointedly at Vexlan. The Saurian medic had the grace to look embarrassed. I was raised with these beliefs from childhood. It is difficult to overcome such deep conditioning, even when presented with contrary evidence. But you did overcome it, Kethvar pointed out. You chose to see past the fear. Because Dr. Chen showed me a different way of thinking, Vexlan replied. She demonstrated that medical ethics require us to help all patients, regardless of social stigma. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the recreation area's entrance. A group of Centauri soldiers had gathered around something, their voices raised in argument. Sarah stood up to get a better look. What's happening? She asked. One of the Centauri, a lieutenant with bandaged arms, turned toward them. The new patients from the Kepler station attack are arriving. Word is there are more bioweapon victims among them. Kethvar felt his stomach tighten. More marked soldiers meant more outcasts. More people who would face the same rejection he had experienced. How many? Sarah asked. 5 confirmed, the lieutenant replied. 3 Centauri, 1 Andromedan, and 1 human. Sarah's expression shifted to professional determination. Vexlan, grab your gear. Kethvar, you're coming with us. Me? Kethvar asked in surprise. You're the only person on this station who truly understands what those patients are going through, Sarah explained. They're going to need someone who can help them cope with the isolation and rejection. As they made their way toward the medical bay, Kethvar felt a strange sense of purpose settling over him. For weeks he had been the only marked soldier on the station, an object of fear and pity, but now there would be others. People who would need the same kind of help that Sarah had given him. The medical bay was already bustling with activity when they arrived. 5 stretchers were being wheeled in, each carrying a patient bearing the familiar black marks of hive bioweapons. The reaction from the medical staff was immediate and predictable at Bauer. Professional competence mixed with obvious discomfort. Sarah moved quickly from patient to patient, assessing their conditions and giving orders. But Kethvar noticed something else, the way the newly marked soldiers looked around the room. Their eyes showed the same confusion and fear he had felt when his own people abandoned him. The human patient, a young woman with marks covering half her face, was conscious and alert. She grabbed Sarah's arm as the doctor examined her. Doc, she whispered urgently. My unit. They wouldn't even look at me when the evac ships came. Said I was contaminated. What's happening to me? The alarm klaxon screamed through Medical Station Gamma 7 at 0347 hours, jolting everyone from sleep. Red emergency lights bathed the corridors as the automated voice announced. What everyone feared most, Ode, Black. Hive assault in progress, all personnel to emergency. Stations, this is not a drill, Dr. Sarah. Chen bolted upright in her quarters, instantly alert. Code Black meant the Hive had found them. After 3 weeks of relative safety, the enemy had tracked down their medical facility. She grabbed her emergency medical kit and ran toward the central medical bay. The corridors were chaos. Soldiers and medical staff rushed in all directions, some heading for defensive positions, others working to evacuate critical patients. The station shuddered as something large impacted the outer hull. Sarah burst into the medical bay to find organized pandemonium. Dr. Vexlan was coordinating the movement of intensive care patients to the heavily armored intersections. Nurses and orderlies worked frantically to secure equipment and supplies. Status report, Sarah called out. 3 Hive bioships dropped out of hyperspace 20 minutes ago, Vexlan replied without looking up from his patient manifest. They've been pounding our outer defenses. Security estimates we have maybe an hour before they breach the hull. Another impact shook the station, stronger this time. Emergency power kicked in as the main generators went offline. In the reduced lighting, Sarah could see the fear on everyone's faces. Where are the marked soldiers? She asked. Vexlan paused in his work. Kethavar volunteered to help with security. The others are assisting with patient evacuation. Why? Before Sarah could answer, the lights went out completely. Emergency power failed with a deep mechanical groan that echoed through the station. Battery-powered emergency strips provided minimal illumination, casting everything in eerie red shadows. That's why, Sarah said grimly. Full power failure means the defense grid is down. They'll be boarding us soon. The sound of metal being torn apart echoed from somewhere distant in the station. Then came something worse. The chittering, clicking sounds of Hive bio-warriors moving through the corridors. They're inside, someone whispered. Panic spread through the medical bay like wildfire. Support staff who were not essential to patient care began fleeing toward the emergency evacuation pods. Some of the walking wounded tried to follow, creating a bottleneck at the exits. Everyone stay calm, Sarah shouted over the noise. Vexlan, how many critical patients can't be moved? 15 in this section alone, he replied. They're on life support or too injured to transport safely. Sarah made a quick decision. Anyone not essential to patient care, evacuate now. Medical personnel, we stay with the patients who can't be moved. Dr. Chen, one of the nurses, protested. The Hive doesn't take prisoners. If we stay, we die. If we leave, our patients die, Sarah replied firmly. I didn't become a doctor to abandon people when they need me most. The sound of fighting grew closer. Laser fire echoed through the corridors, along with the horrible screaming sounds that Hive bio-warriors made when they attacked. Most of the non-medical staff had fled by now, leaving only about 20 people in the medical bay with the immobile patients. Doctor, Vexlan said quietly, perhaps we should consider... He was interrupted by the medical bay doors exploding inward. Smoke and debris filled the air as dark shapes moved through the breach. The first Hive bio-warrior was a nightmare of chitin and claws, its multiple eyes scanning the room for targets. Screams erupted from the remaining staff as more bio-warriors poured through the opening. These creatures were designed for terror as much as killing or were 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor, with mandibles that could snap a person in half. Most of the medical personnel dove for cover behind equipment or under patient beds. A few tried to run for the secondary exits, but Sarah stood her ground in the center of the room, positioning herself between the creatures and her patients. You want them, you go through me, she said, though her voice shook with fear. The lead bio-warrior chittered something in the Hive language and began moving toward her. Its claws extended, dripping with acidic venom. Sarah had no weapons, no armor, no way to fight such a creature, but she did not move. The bio-warrior raised its claws to strike, and Sarah closed her eyes. The killing blow never came. Instead, she heard the creature make a surprised clicking sound, followed by a meaty thud. Sarah opened her eyes to see a massive figure standing between her and the bio-warrior. Kethavar had appeared seemingly from nowhere, holding an emergency plasma torch like a weapon. I think not, the Saurian warrior growled, his black-marked scales seeming to absorb the red emergency lighting. The bio-warrior lay on the floor behind him. A smoking hole burned through its thorax. But 3 more creatures were already advancing, and Kethavar had only a short-range tool, not a proper weapon. Kethavar, get out of here, Sarah shouted. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do, he replied calmly, adjusting his grip on the plasma torch. This is what I was meant for. The 3 bio-warriors spread out, trying to flank him. Kethavar moved with surprising grace for such a large being, using his knowledge of their tactics to predict their movements. He managed to severely wound one creature before the other two got close enough to attack. Claws raked across his chest, tearing through his medical tunic and drawing dark blood. Kethavar grunted in pain but did not back down. He grabbed one bio-warrior by the throat and used his superior strength to slam it into the wall. The creature's chitin cracked, but it was not dead. The second bio-warrior leaped at his back, claws extended for a killing strike. Sarah screamed a warning, but there was nothing anyone could do. Then the medical bay doors on the opposite side burst open, and 5 more figures charged into the room. The other marked soldiers had arrived. Corporal Williams, the human with marks on her face, carried a salvaged pulse rifle. The Andromedan's crystalline form had been modified with improvised armor plating. The 3 Centauri had armed themselves with whatever weapons they could find. "Nobody hurts our medics," Williams shouted as she opened fire. The battle that followed was brief but intense. 6 marked soldiers against 8 hive bio-warriors in the confined space of the medical bay. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a slaughter. Our bio-warriors were designed to be superior to most organic soldiers. But the marked soldiers fought with desperate fury, knowing that the lives of helpless patients depended on them. More importantly, they fought as a team, covering each other's weaknesses and combining their different species' abilities. Kethavar's strength and tactical knowledge, Williams' marksmanship, the Andromedan's crystalline armor that could deflect claws, the Centauri's pack-hunting instincts. Together they were more than the sum of their parts. When the last bio-warrior fell, the medical bay was a wreck. Equipment was destroyed, blood was everywhere, and several of the marked soldiers were badly wounded. But all the patients were alive, and none of the medical staff had been seriously hurt. Sarah knelt beside Kethavar, who had taken the worst of the damage. Deep claw marks covered his chest and arms, adding new scars to his collection of black marks. "You magnificent idiot," she said, as she began treating his wounds with supplies from her emergency kit. "You could have been killed." "Worth it," Kethavar replied with a weak smile. "These people needed protection. That is what we do now." Around them, the other marked soldiers were helping to treat wounded medical staff and checking on patients. The same people who had been outcasts and pariahs just hours ago were now the heroes who had saved everyone. Dr. Vexlan approached, looking shaken but amazed. I do not understand. Why did you come back? You could have evacuated with the others." Corporal Williams looked up from where she was checking on one of the critical care patients. "Because Dr. Chen didn't abandon us when everyone else did. We weren't going to abandon her. Besides," added one of the Centauri with a grin, "someone had to show these bug faces that marked soldiers are still soldiers." The sound of approaching footsteps made everyone tense up again. But these were friendly voices calling out in Coalition standard. Security forces had retaken this section of the station. Commander Thelvas, a Turian officer in charge of station security, entered the medical bay with a squad of armed soldiers. He stopped short when he saw the carnage and the marked soldiers standing among the defeated bio-warriors. "Status report," he demanded. "Medical bay secured," Kethavar replied, trying to stand at attention despite his wounds. 15 patients protected, medical staff unharmed. Commander Thelvas looked around the destroyed room, taking in the evidence of the fierce battle. "You did this? 6 soldiers against 8 bio-warriors?" "6 marked soldiers," Williams corrected proudly. "The ones everyone said were cursed and contaminated." The Turian commander's expression was unreadable. "I see, and where were you stationed during the attack?" "They weren't stationed anywhere," Sarah interjected, moving to stand beside Kethavar. "They volunteered to help with evacuation, and when the bio-warriors breached the medical bay, they came back to defend the patients." "Without orders?" "Without hesitation," Sarah replied firmly. Commander Thelvas was quiet for a long moment, studying the marked soldiers. Several other coalition personnel had gathered behind him, all staring at the unlikely group of heroes. "Remarkable," the commander said finally. 8 bio-warriors is enough to overwhelm most full squads. How did you manage it?" Kethavar straightened to spit 6 months after the Battle of Medical Station Gamma 7. The story had spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The tale of 6 marked soldiers who defied death to protect helpless patients had captured the imagination of billions. News networks broadcast interviews. Military academies studied their tactics, and children played games pretending to be the Shadow Guard. But Kethvar barely noticed the fame. He was too busy with his new life. Transport approaching from 2 o'clock, Corporal Williams called out through the communication system. Looks like civilian evacuation ships. Kethvar adjusted his scanner and confirmed the reading. Confirmed. 3 ships, refugee configuration. They're broadcasting coalition medical assistance codes. The 2 marked soldiers stood on the observation deck of the medical cruiser, Mercy's hand, watching as the rescue ships approached their position near the contested Vega system. It had been a busy week. 2 emergency evacuations, 1 field hospital setup, and countless medical emergencies. Dr. Sarah Chen appeared beside them, carrying her ever-present medical kit and a steaming cup of coffee. How many refugees this time? Approximately 300, Kethvar replied. Mixed species, mostly civilians fleeing the hive advance on Vega Prime. Sarah nodded and activated her wrist communicator. Medical Bay, this is Dr. Chen. Prepare for mass casualty reception. 300 refugees, unknown condition. Have trauma team standing by. The response came immediately. Acknowledged, Dr. Chen. All teams are ready. Kethvar smiled at the crisp, professional response. The crew of the Mercy's Hand was entirely volunteer, drawn from across the coalition by the story of the marked soldiers and their human medic. They had received over 10,000 applications for the 400 crew positions. Still hard to believe, isn't it? Williams said, following his gaze toward the approaching ships. What is? All of this. 6 months ago, I was ready to hide in a cave somewhere and wait to die. Now we're commanding our own medical cruiser with a crew that actually wants to serve with us. It was true. The Mercy's Hand had been donated by the Centauri government, equipped with the finest medical technology from a dozen worlds, and staffed by volunteers who believed in their mission. More importantly, it was the first coalition vessel officially commanded by marked soldiers. The refugee ships docked without incident, and soon the medical bay was filled with the controlled chaos of emergency treatment. Sarah moved from patient to patient with her usual efficiency, while Kethvar coordinated security and logistics. Among the refugees was a group of Saurian families, their silvery scales dulled by exhaustion and fear. Kethvar noticed them immediately, Ro. It had been months since he had seen any of his own people. An elderly Saurian male lay on one of the treatment tables, his breathing labored from some respiratory ailment. A younger female, probably his daughter, held his hand while Sarah examined him. He will be fine, Sarah assured the daughter in accented Saurian. Just exhaustion and dehydration. A few days of rest and proper nutrition will have him back on his feet. The daughter looked up to thank the doctor and froze when she saw Kethvar standing nearby. Her eyes immediately fixed on the black marks covering his scales, and her expression shifted to familiar fear and revulsion. Marked one, she whispered, pulling back from Sarah. You treat patients with a cursed one nearby? The contamination ow is a superstition with no basis in medical fact, Sarah interrupted firmly. Kethvar is my chief of security and one of the finest people I've ever known. The Saurian woman looked between Sarah and Kethvar, clearly struggling with conflicting emotions. But the ancient laws said that marked warriors were heroes, Kethvar said quietly, stepping forward. The fear you feel was taught to our people by priests who gained power through spreading terror. He gestured toward the bustling medical bay, where marked soldiers worked alongside unmarked crew members to treat hundreds of refugees. Do you see contamination here? Do you see evil? Or do you see people helping others regardless of their species or appearance? The woman's father stirred on the treatment table, his breathing already easier thanks to Sarah's treatment. Liskara, he said weakly, what is happening? Father, there is a marked one here. We should leave a... No. The old male's voice was stronger now. He struggled to sit up, looking directly at Kethvar. I know that voice. You are Kethvar, son of General Thelkavar. Kethvar blinked in surprise. You know my father? I served under him 30 years ago during the Rigel campaign. You have his voice, his bearing. The old Saurian studied Kethvar's marked scales. So this is what became of his warrior son. The priest said you had been consumed by evil. Do I seem consumed by evil? Kethvar asked gently. The old male looked around the medical bay, taking in the scene of organized compassion. Marked soldiers and unmarked crew working together, saving lives without regard for species or status. No, he said finally. You seem to be exactly what a warrior should be, a protector of the innocent. His daughter looked shocked. Father, the teachings, are wrong, the old male said firmly. I have lived long enough to recognize honor when I see it. This marked warrior shows more honor in caring for refugees than the priests show in their grand temples. Dr. Vexilon appeared at Kethvar's shoulder, carrying a medical scanner. The Saurian medic had become a permanent member of their crew, helping to bridge the gap between marked soldiers and traditional coalition forces. Sir, Vexilon said to the old Saurian, may I scan your respiratory system? Dr. Chen wants to ensure there are no long-term effects from whatever environmental toxins you encountered on Vega Prime. The elderly Saurian nodded, then looked curiously at Vexilon. You serve with marked ones willingly. I serve with heroes, Vexilon replied simply. The marks are irrelevant. As Vexilon conducted his scan, Kethvar noticed other refugees watching their conversation. Word was spreading through the medical bay. Ow. The marked soldiers were not monsters, but protectors, people who had risked everything to help complete strangers. Kethvar, Sarah called from across the room. We need you over here. He approached to find her treating a young Andromedan whose crystalline structure had been badly damaged by hive acid weapons. The child was conscious but in obvious pain. Can you help me communicate with her? Sarah asked. My translator is having trouble with her dialect, and I need to explain the treatment procedure. Kethvar knelt beside the treatment table and spoke softly to the young Andromedan in her own language. Coalition soldiers were required to learn multiple languages, and his linguistic skills had proven invaluable in their medical missions. As he translated between Sarah and the patient, Kethvar became aware that the entire medical bay had grown quieter. Refugees and crew members alike were watching the interaction, a feared, cursed warrior gently comforting a frightened child. There, Sarah said as she finished applying a healing matrix to the young Andromedan's damaged structure. That should help your body repair itself. You'll be good as new in a few days. The child looked up at Kethvar with large, faceted eyes. Thank you, she said in perfect coalition standard. You are very kind for a scary monster. Kethvar laughed, a deep rumbling sound that filled the medical bay. I am not a monster, little one. I am just a soldier who got painted by the enemy. Like war paint? Exactly like war paint. The child smiled, and the tension that had filled the medical bay dissolved. If a child could see past the marks to the person underneath, perhaps there was hope for changing adult minds as well. Commander Torres, the Mercy's Hand's unmarked second-in-command, approached with a communication pad. Sir, we're receiving a priority message from Coalition Command. Kethvar accepted the pad and read the message, his expression growing serious. Orders? New assignment. There's a research station in the Tau Ceti system that's gone silent. Last transmission mentioned hive bioweapon attacks. They want us to investigate and provide medical assistance if there are survivors. Dangerous mission, Torres noted. The Tau Ceti system is deep in contested space. We'll be operating without backup. Kethvar looked around the medical bay at his crew, marked soldiers, unmarked volunteers, and refugees from a dozen worlds all working together with common purpose. We accept, he said firmly. That is what we do. As the Mercy's Hand changed course toward the Tau Ceti system, Kethvar found himself in the ship's small chapel. It was a quiet space where crew members of various faiths could find peace and reflection. Sarah found him there an hour later, sitting before a simple altar decorated with symbols from many worlds. Credits for your thoughts, she said, settling into the chair beside him. I was thinking about the first time we met, Kethvar replied. When you found me on that battlefield abandoned by my own people, I thought my life was over, and now I understand that it was not ending or it was beginning. Everything before that moment was just preparation for what I was meant to become. Sarah smiled. A protector of the innocent? A member of a family that chooses each other rather than being born into tradition. He gestured toward the chapel's simple beauty. This ship, this crew, this mission, we are not bound by old laws or ancient fears.